it's time to move forward, of course, to our special Next in Sports session. Absolutely. And before, of course, we move to that Next in Sports session, where, of course, we're going to have a very well-known name and someone who, of course, needs no introduction. We are first going to have, of course, a session on Next in Nuclear. And for that, of course, and Next in Nuclear is, of course, remember, a very, very important, pertinent issue. It's an issue, of course, it's a domain, it's a sector where we are seeing tremendous collaboration between India and other countries, of course, abroad. What is the potential for this, though, going ahead? That is something we're going to focus on. Remember, this is an energy of the future. As the world, of course, moves to alternative sources of power, and particularly, of course, renewable and cleaner energy, our next session is, of course, extremely topical. Next in Nuclear is our next big focus. And joining us for this session is Ashwin Nandurkar, CEO, India X Fusion. We also have with us Ted Jones. He's live with us, Senior Director for National Security, Nuclear Energy Institute. Also with us is Dr. Chris Singh, Founder Chairman of Holtec. It's a fabulous panel, and this panel is going to be chaired by Suhaan Mukerji, founding partner PLR Chambers. He's our special session chair at NXT 2025. Firstly, could we please have a warm round of applause for our next panel? And now the floor is yours. Over to you, Suhaan.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I wonder if Chris can hear us. Chris, are you connected?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. Yes, Suhaan, I can hear you, but the video is somehow not working. I cannot seem to unmute the video mute.
Okay, could we have Chris up on the screens as well so that the audience can see him? No? Okay, anyway, we'll move ahead and take up the session. It's a pleasure to be here. It's also heartening to see that we have nuclear being discussed in a forum like this. It's probably the first time that we are actually all coming together as an industry and sitting in front of everybody here. The speakers are from various backgrounds. Chris Singh, the CEO, founder, chairman of Holtec, is somebody who went from India and built a successful nuclear business sitting out of the US. Ted is someone who, we've known each other for nearly 20 years now, I would say, because in the first run of when the nuclear sector was opening up and there was collaboration with the United States, Ted brought his first mission of over 60 companies from the US in 2006. We're still there to see a lot of success come through as yet an actual business happening, but I think it's heartening that the budget spoke about this, and Ashwin is here to talk about fusion when we move forward. But my first opening remarks, I would request, Chris, if you could tell us, how you built Holtec and the ecosystem that enabled you to build the business of Holtec sitting out of the US that spread across the world, across multiple jurisdictions, and I know that you now have manufacturing in India as well. If you could shed some light on what are ecosystem enablers for the nuclear sector to actually develop in a country. Chris, can you hear us? Okay, maybe we can start with Ted, who also has membership from around the country, and different countries around the world. On how do you see ecosystem development and what are models that India could look at to increase private participation and an opening up of the market?
Well, it's a very timely question since India seems to be considering private sector participation in the nuclear energy sector. The United States is one of the few countries in the world that has had private sector leading in the nuclear energy sector from the beginning. The invention of the commercial technologies was by General Electric and Westinghouse with the boiling and pressurized water reactors many, many decades ago. And since then, the U.S. has a very large ecosystem. that includes a lot of public-private partnerships. And internationally, we have been very comfortable working with both governments and private industry. I think the U.S. has a pretty strong record of industrial partnership with technology transfer and localization, and even standing up new nuclear industries that in some cases have become rivals in their own right. So I think India, with its dynamic private sector, has a huge possibility to deploy nuclear in different areas as it's required today. And I think there's a lot of companies in the U.S. who would be interested to explore partnerships.
So why didn't the momentum that we built up that led to the 123 agreement and thereafter, the liberalization in terms of the partnership and legislations in both countries that enabled India to firstly become the first nuclear weapon state to actually get a lot of waivers and to be able to participate in international civil nuclear commerce, not actually concretely have new plants being built, technology being transferred, capital moving across these countries?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it was 2008 when the U.S.-India Section 123 agreement was concluded. And so that's a long time ago. We could have built some nuclear power plants by now. I think a big hindrance was the policy on liability that was implemented 15 years ago in 2010. This just introduced some deviations from international norms, and U.S. companies and other private sector companies as well were just a little unwilling to do something that they don't do anywhere else in the world. But there does remain a great interest in partnering in multiple dimensions here in India, and I think that with consideration of reforming some of these policies, you could see finally this potential realized.
So the speech of the finance minister recently, when talking about the budget, it was very clear that she put it out on the floor of Parliament that there is going to be amendments to both the Atomic Energy Act as well as the liability law. What would you like to see, quick few points on what you would like to see in those amendments if, and I will say that you represent more than just US industry, given that the Nuclear Energy Institute has membership from Europe, Japan, etc. And it's also been the liability has been one of the hurdles that the French have also not participated. And the agreements of what was previously Arriva and then EDF to build in Jaitapur has actually not moved forward, even though there was a revised agreement between NPCIL and EDF in 2018. And I can say, having chaired the Civil Nuclear Liability Committee on the Indian side, that there are Indian companies that have also been hesitant to move forward. So what are the top things that you would like to see as part of that change?
Well, you're correct. The Nuclear Energy Institute is based in Washington, and we're mostly U.S. companies that own, operate plants, design plants, service them across their lifetime. But we have more than a dozen countries that belong to NEI, and what I hear is it's not that complicated. Really, there's an international practice on nuclear liability that the IAEA has modeled, and I think conforming to that is really the main thing. I would say that U.S. companies in 2025 have a lot of opportunities in the world, and they have for so long not been engaged in India that it probably needs to be something very effective to remind them of what brought 60 executives on that first trade mission. And I think that would definitely come back.
Okay, I'll shift gears slightly and come to you, Ashwin. I know you're the India CEO for a Japanese startup that's working in fusion. I think for those of us in the room, could you do a fusion for dummies and let us know, what's the breakthrough that's recently happened on the fusion side where people are now thinking about the fact that there could be a shift in technology over the next 10 or 15 years to actually realize things. Oh, and I see that Chris has been able to also log in, but go ahead, Ashwin, and then we'll come to Chris right after.
Cool. So I'll give a quick intro of what is fusion for dummies, as you mentioned. Fusion is the reaction where two small atoms come together and form a bigger atom and release a lot of energy. That's the reaction that powers the sun, that powers all the stars for millions of years. That's what a lot of private companies are trying to create on Earth to solve the climate crisis and energy crisis in the world. This has been happening for the last about 75 years. Research started in the 1950s in the US. There were 2-3 major changes that has led to a lot of hype about it, a lot of chatter about it. First one happened in 2018 when a lot of research from MIT's Plasma and Fusion Research Lab spun off as a private company with a lot of funding from the private sector. That majorly changed the gears for the industry because that showed the world that the industry is much more closer to commercialization because private money was willing to back private or fusion research. That was one. Second, the same company has recently, about a couple of years ago, released the strongest magnet in the world, which enables fusion power to move forward. Thirdly, on a fusion level, we have a US national lab in the US has achieved parity. What I mean by that is to create fusion, you have to put in a lot of energy because you have to bring in atoms together and then merge them. On that level, the US lab has achieved parity, implies they consumed X amount of energy and released 3X energy. And as we move forward, this is where we would eventually be able to create a power plant which can power the world.
Got it. Thank you, Ashwin, and welcome back, Chris. I hope you can hear us loud and clear. I will put the question that I had handed over to Ted to reply to you, to say somebody like you who's from India, who went in the 80s and built up an extremely successful nuclear business out of the US that has global operations, including here in India. What are the ecosystem enablers that you believe that are required for us to actually end up doing business and seizing the opportunity that nuclear has promised, and to achieve even the 100 gigawatts that India wants to achieve by 2047? How do we accelerate the cooperation between our two countries and industry?
Okay. Well, greetings to you all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Yeah.
Okay, great, great. Well, the answer is very, very simple. It's evident. The driving force in the US economy is private enterprise. Every industry is essentially in private hands, including nuclear. Practically all generation nuclear in the United States is in the hands of private companies. People like me run other nuclear plants, and we are held responsible for the plant safety, operation, and also its cost competitiveness. And that means that anyone who has a good idea, a winning idea, has a place at the table in the industry. When I started back in the mid-80s, at that time I had several unique innovations that I brought to the table. The utilities, the nuclear power plant generators, they were more than anxious to entertain them. And within 4 or 5 years, for example, Holtec became the intellectual monopoly, I call it, for densifying storage and spent fuel pools and nuclear plants in the US and later around the world, most of the world, free trading world. And same thing happened with our other set of ideas for dry storage of spent fuel. More recently, we are developing a small modular reactor for the past 10 years. And it's the same story plays over and over. The best ideas win. Our company, I have over 200 patents on new nuclear reactors design. And we have as you know, we have manufacturing facility. We provide turnkey services and equipment. All this directly feeds into the meritocracy that the United States is. And that is in direct contrast to government ownership. It just doesn't work. Or to have even private ownership as a monopoly. U.S. has continuously tried to erode public government ownership and make it private. If India does that, believe me the 100 gigawatt will be realized by 2047 without any problem. Also, private ownership will allow the country to attract vast amounts of capital that is needed. So let the marketplace do its magic and just free the country from the government direct ownership of the nuclear industry. Nuclear is no different than any other industry today. Our small modular reactors, even if you try to sabotage them, it's not going to produce a radioactive nuclear cloud. It's a walk-away safe reactor. So why treat nuclear in a special category and keep the government in full charge of it? Why not open it up? And that is my lesson in over past 54 years that I have been in nuclear. That's my lesson learned. And that's my wisdom received, if you will.
Okay. No, thank you for that, Chris. And I mean, I think there is a public fear here, and if we were to go by the statements of the government, there are certain strategic sectors where they won't maybe go to 100% privatization, but there is a likelihood that we may see a joint venture model happen, or we could possibly see liberalization as far as SMRs are concerned. And would that be a model that could still attract private capital and technology, where we see an initial few steps on joint ventures between the public sector and the private sector, and step-by-step build up to complete private sector ownership over nuclear generation plants?
Yes, there is some wisdom in it to go slow and not to make a radical change overnight. SMR is a perfect place to do this because, as I said, the criterion for admitting an SMR in India, technology in India, should be that it be walk-away safe, because that will give public the confidence, that will give the capital requirement also, as you know, is not as large as it is for SMRs. So it will allow private capital to flow in, get some plants built, and then we, in a well-measured way, open up the market to larger private ownership as the government hones its control. How you control an industry without actually running it, that's the secret sauce here. Okay. How do you do it? So that will take time, and that's okay. But we got to move. The world is not standing still, as we all know. And in the SMR world, there is international competition. I would expect that aggressive rising economies like China will offer SMR at India's doorstep. Countries that are what people call the Indosphere. There will be efforts to sell SMRs. If India doesn't provide one, others will.
Got that.
And that is not going to be good for India's geopolitical situation.
Understood. Quickly, Ted, since we're running out of time, where do you think the opportunity lies for India to actually take advantage of the renewed interest in nuclear energy Because you've seen all the big tech guys, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, all coming in to invest into that. Where is that play that India could actually participate in and make a difference?
Yeah, the only impediment there, other than private ownership, is the liability, nuclear liability. And that is the only impediment that keeps foreign companies from investing. And you know, I tell people, it's the Bhopal, right, experience, which is a sad and a horrible tragedy, but realize that the total loss, damages paid in Bhopal were less than $500 million. And that was a massive tragedy. Nuclear plant accidents in the Western world have not caused any such level of human tragedy. Actually, we haven't had a human fatality directly from the nuclear accident. So to have this unlimited liability, and add to that the fact that the SMRs are, unlike large reactors, are walk-away safe. Most of them, not all. They're walk-away safe. So why have such a ridiculously large penalty, liability that hangs in the background and keeps commercial businesses from participating in India? That is the problem.
Okay.
Let's get rid of the liability law. Make it more in line with what exists in other countries.
Got it. Thank you, Chris. Ted, if you could just answer that question quickly, because that's what's next for India in the sense of becoming part of the global economy on nuclear.
Yeah, yes, I think that with the coming to the market of the SMRs, such as the Holtec SMR, India has a tremendous opportunity that never existed in the era of large reactors. These smaller reactors, they're more like building airplanes than building airports. And Dr. Singh's company is already manufacturing in India, but other companies too could be manufacturing here, not just for the Indian market, but for the global market. And I think that U.S. companies need Indian partnership. I think together we can produce these reactors to countries that need them, not just India, but even the United States. The Nuclear Energy Institute polls our utility members, and they tell us they need 100 gigawatts of new nuclear by the 2050s, new nuclear, in addition to extending the operating life of existing plants. That's makes the U.S. one of the biggest markets in the world. But our supply chain can't meet that, not in the United States. So we need India to help us in the United States, and as well as here and around the world. It's a huge potential for partnership, not just in supply chain, but in investment as well. And I think that it's a bright future if we could just sort out these policy barriers that Dr. Singh referred to.
Okay, thank you, Ted. Okay, Ashwin, quickly in under 15 seconds, what should we be doing to boost the fusion piece as India? Because I remember there are now, a few years ago, there were 1,000 people working. Now there are 4,000. There's one startup out of India that's been funded. What do we need to do next to drive fusion research?
I think it's very simple. We need to participate. India as a country is not participating in fusion, and that's all we need to do. Just be there, just be present on the stage, global stage, if not global, at least local stage. We have talent, we have research, we need direction. As the private sector, we need certain direction from the government, and that's all I would say. Just participate in fusion, because that, I think it could be the biggest contributor to Vikasit Bharat in 2047. And that's what I would say. Just participate.
So you would say academia, private sector, government just participating in what's going on globally in the fusion industry?
Exactly. But majorly from a government perspective, because we don't have clarity if what the government is looking at. What are they looking at for next 10 years, 20 years, 25 years from a fusion perspective, specifically.
Okay. Thank you. I think we are over time. Dr. Singh, thank you for joining us from the US. Look forward to you leading the charge as well, as part of the diaspora on bringing India into international nuclear commerce. Thank you, Ted. Always a pleasure to be chatting with you on what India should be doing along with the US and other countries. Thank you very much for being patient listeners, and we'll end the session here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bye.